The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
What will the Democrats do when they take over the House of Representatives? We've now got a pretty good idea. Investigate, investigate, investigate. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com, and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. The new acting attorney general, Russian interference in the 2016 election, Trump's business dealings, all of those things and more are on the table as Democrats prepare to take control of the House. We'll talk about how they plan to put President Trump under a microscope in the months ahead. After Trump declared himself a nationalist, the left has tried to twist that into white nationalism, and the French president called nationalism a betrayal of patriotism. We'll talk over what the president's nationalism means and, more importantly, does not mean. Plus, a federal judge rules in favor of CNN in its initial bid to overturn Trump's suspension of grandstanding reporter Jim Acosta from the White House. We'll discuss that suit and the judge's ruling. Plus, why is Fox News taking the side of CNN? And what the heck is the emoluments clause, and why is the left using it to attack Donald Trump?
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We begin with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. So the big question around the D.C. swamp these days is, what are the Democrats going to do with their newfound power, with their new majority status in the House of Representatives once they take the reins in January? Most observers expect the Democrats to unleash their pent-up frustration over the election of Donald Trump by launching multiple investigations of the president and his administration. And while a lot of Democrats are trying to sound like they'll use their power for constructive purposes, they can hardly hide how anxious they are to take swings at Trump. Many of them have decried Trump's appointment of Matthew Whitaker as acting attorney general following the resignation of Jeff Sessions, including the prospective chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, appearing on MSNBC.
The president is creating a constitutional crisis that's a moment of peril for our country. His actions fit a clear pattern of interference and attempting of sabotage of the special counsel's investigation. These are all further evidence of a conspiracy to obstruct justice.
Sabotage, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Again, with the constitutional crisis. Nadler managed to get in all the hot-button words the left uses to try and take down Trump. Everything done by Trump these days is creating a constitutional crisis. The left apparently forgetting the reality about crying wolf, that people stop paying attention after a while. Far-left Congressman Eric Swalwell went on CNN and provided a preview of what the Democrats will be doing when they take over the House.
while we're going to prioritize, the economy and lifting up, wages and protecting health care, we're also no longer going to let the president get away with, easing sanctions on Chinese companies while he gets a $500 million loan from the Chinese on a Trump Tower project. We're not going to allow the president to just, kill this Russia investigation by, hiring an assassin like Matt Whitaker to come in and take it out.
An assassin like Matt Whitaker. Again, with the incendiary language from the left. And when Swalwell talked about that Trump deal with China, it signals that the left is planning to apply what's called the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution, which prohibits members of the government from accepting various types of gifts or personally benefiting from commerce. They're trying to apply that to the business dealings of Trump since he became president. We'll talk more about this later in the show with Scott Cosenza. But here is prospective House Oversight Committee Chairman Elijah Cummings.
We definitely want to look at the Emolument Clause possible violations. I think there are probably many of them. We want to look at things like the FBI building fiasco where the president injected himself into that debate as to where it would be located, we think, for his benefit. We got to figure out, when is he acting on behalf of the American people in a lot of his decisions, or is he acting on his own behalf?
So as the left continues to talk about the Emoluments Clause and attacks Trump's entirely legal change of attorneys general, they're also doing all they can to delegitimize American elections, as they did after Hillary Clinton was beaten in 2016. Listen to one of the Democrats' likely presidential candidates in 2020, Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown, discuss the governor's race in Georgia, where the counting continues, but leftist Stacey Abrams appears beaten by Republican Brian Kemp.
If Stacey Abrams doesn't win in Georgia, they stole it. It's clear. It's clear. And I say that publicly, it's clear. What they're trying to do in Florida to the gubernatorial candidate and to the Senate candidate running for re-election. They can't win elections because there's way more of us than there are them. They can't win elections fairly.
This accusation from a leading Democrat and likely presidential candidate, while the laughably incompetent and or corrupt officials in Broward County, Florida, find more votes after election night in the most Democrat county in the state. The recount continues in Florida for both governor and senator. But to the matter of who among the dozens of possible Democrat presidential candidates could actually beat Trump in 2020, the conscience of the left, Michael Moore, says it won't be anyone in office.
We cannot run a politician against him. We will lose. We have to run a beloved American. It's got to be like a Michelle Obama.
Michelle Obama for president. Well, sounds just about as plausible as any of the others, including Hillary Clinton, who continues to send out signals that she's not done and incredibly may run for president for a third time. Meanwhile, leftists continue to harass and threaten conservatives in public. In the latest incident, the victim was a Fox News personality, Kat Timpf.
Over the weekend, I was at a bar, and a girl she realized I worked at Fox News, started screaming at me, telling me to get out. I tried to move to a different area of the bar. She kept screaming at me, telling me to get out. I kept trying to say, like, what did I say that you had a problem with? Or maybe I thought it was one of my views that was so offensive. She said it doesn't matter. I don't think she knew a single thing that I ever said on TV. She just knew where I worked, and that was enough for me to be run out of the bar.
Well, this just keeps happening, and it will continue to happen, absent leftist leaders, whoever they may be at this point, condemning these incidents. And to that point, we close our Say What with Nancy Pelosi again at an event held by Reverend Al Sharpton.
Thank you for saving America. Reverend Sharpton, thank you for saving America.
Yes, the likely next Speaker of the House thanks Al Sharpton for saving America. Folks, you just can't make this stuff up. Up next, what exactly did Donald Trump mean when he declared himself a nationalist? Well, He's being savagely attacked for it, and we'll talk over what Trump's nationalism is and isn't with LibertyNation.com managing editor Mark Angelides.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel and get our Truth is Making a Comeback. America's Top Stories. With LN Editor-in-Chief Lisa K. Donner. An alternative to the leftist programs on TV. 5 facts. Just the facts, ma'am. Without the liberal bias. LN Radio, syndicated from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Listen to all the big names in politics with your host, Tim Donner. LN TV, the right analysis with our Liberty Nation authors from across the globe. The Uprising Podcast, fun and entertaining commentary on what's really going on in the swamp with Scott Cosenza and Tim Donner. All this and more when you subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel today, because
Truth
is making a
comeback.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, it's beyond time that we straighten out what Donald Trump's self-proclaimed nationalism means and, more importantly, does not mean. After Trump declared himself a nationalist during the midterm election campaign, the elite media unleashed the first front in the war to deride nationalism and protect globalism with a flurry of accusations that the president was employing code language, or the hackneyed term dog whistle, to signal his racist followers that he really meant white nationalists. And then a second front in the establishment war on nationalism was launched last weekend by French President Emmanuel Macron, who chose a solemn ceremony commemorating the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I to declare that nationalism is a betrayal of patriotism. Here to help us sort out what nationalism is and isn't is LibertyNation.com managing editor and proud Brit, Mark Angelides, who joins us from the UK. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Well, Mark, it's a pleasure. Let's start with the white nationalism thing. This was nothing less than a blood libel. But we've become so accustomed to this kind of attack from the left that it hasn't raised the kind of ruckus it should have. I guess the only thing missing was a direct reference to Hitler when they call Trump a white nationalist. Please describe for us, if you would, what President Trump's nationalism is and isn't.
Quite simply, to start with what it isn't. Well, it isn't race-based. That's pretty much the first thing and the most important thing to say. What Trump's been doing over the last 2 years, and arguably quite successfully, is trying to raise the living standards of all Americans. Now, that doesn't matter whether they're white Americans, black Americans, any colored Americans at all. It's about raising the living standards of the whole. And the key factor in this is Americans. And that brings us on to what Trump's nationalism is. It's a question of putting, as he says again and again, America first, the interests of American citizens, regardless of race, above the interests of other people.
Now, you and I have discussed this before, and I think we're agreed on the words to describe what Trump's nationalism or his view of American unity is. And it's not multiculturalism, but it's unicultural and multiracial. Explain what you and I mean when we say Trump seeks a unicultural, multiracial society.
Sure. So it's the idea of one culture being dominant over all others. Now, that culture is not a white culture. It's a multiracial culture. It comes basically from the founding of America, where it was people who were not joined by a shared geography or a shared language or a shared religion even. It was a shared ideal. And that ideal was to live as free people in what were originally the British colonies of America, and then came on to become arguably the greatest nation on earth. And that's the culture. Multiracial means that it's not supposed to be divided into different racial segments. It's everybody under one banner. I mean, I believe somewhere written down in America, I can't think where, there's a e pluribus unum. Let me just check my wallet.
Oh, yes, it's on the actual currency.
Absolutely.
Yes, and well stated, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. I've written about this. You have, in effect, written about this, that what we've lost here really is the sense of a melting pot, which has been sacrificed at the altar of a mosaic of various ethnic and racial identities, all holding on to those identities over an American identity.
Yeah, I mean, even Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, not for much longer, though, has admitted on many occasions that multiculturalism has failed because it fails to unify people. It doesn't give people who are newcomers looking to become, in Germany, German citizens and part of the German fabric. It doesn't give them something to become.
As we continue with Mark Angelides, managing editor for LibertyNation.com, joining us from the UK, let's shift our focus to Europe, Mark. What countries in Europe are trending towards full nationalism? Which of the nationalist movements in Europe are the strongest?
The funny thing is, and I'll just preface this, is a lot of people would suggest that nationalism in Europe, especially in Britain, they'd say it's for the old white folk. That's what they're saying.
Right.
This is only in Britain where the majority, at present, the majority who favour a more nationalistic approach. I prefer Nigel Farage's way of looking at it, nationism. I prefer that term myself. That's semantics, I guess. But across Europe, it's all young movements, it's all young people, it's all people who are internet savvy. Now, the countries specifically, clearly we have Italy, nominally under Salvini. The Five Star Movement and La Liga, they're very much an Italy first movement, and they now have commanding power in Italy. Obviously, you've got Hungary with Viktor Orban, who has won his fourth election, the third consecutive one, which is very much a Hungary first, the people of Hungary first, their culture first.
And he's been and Orban has been brutally attacked by the globalists in Europe.
Oh yeah, hugely. I mean, what you have to remember is very few people look back into the past. They only start looking at him when he started attacking the more globalist ideas that were coming through. But this is a guy who's fought for freedom and independence against the communists. So he's been doing this for all of his life. To say that he's a nationalist puppet, which is what they're accusing him of, is ridiculous. In Germany, you have the AfD, who have essentially, it's them, the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, that has pushed Merkel to not run again as chancellor. They've gained seats in pretty much every municipality there. They have over 100 seats in the Bundestag.
German nationalism has risen for the first time since World War II. But, of course, Germany's particularly sensitive to nationalism because of Hitler and the Nazis. That party was called both nationalist and socialist. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Very welcome. Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Mark Angelides, managing editor for LibertyNation.com. Up next, Fox News. Is it still alternative media, or has it become just another part of the D.C. elite media?
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Liberty Nation Radio, syndicated from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. And a special welcome this week to the good folks of Brownwood, Texas, fairly near Abilene. listening on KXYL 102.3 FM and 1240 AM. Fox News, the symbol of conservative media, the longtime island of conservatism in a sea of powerful leftist media like the New York Times, Washington Post, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN. Other than talk radio, Fox is supposed to be the only place you find fair and balanced. But is Fox News still the alternative cable TV news channel they purport to be? The we report, you decide independent voice that won't follow the same party line as the media establishment from which they seek to set themselves apart? Well, CNN has succeeded for now in their bid to overturn Trump's suspension of their reporter Jim Acosta, though the legal challenges by the Trump administration will certainly continue. We'll talk about that ruling with LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza in the next segment. But Fox News lending aid and comfort to CNN in supporting that lawsuit makes you wonder, not so much if Fox is conservative, it is most of the time, but if they've effectively waved the flag of surrender to the elite media, as if to say, maybe if we go along with your preposterous assertion that the showboating, grandstanding Jim Acosta, so nakedly anti-Trump that a child of 5 could see it, should be guaranteed access to the White House, no matter his behavior and professionalism or lack thereof. Maybe you'll like us. Maybe you won't be mean to us, and maybe you'll tell us that we're okay after all. It's understandable that Fox News would support their fellow journalists if, like in the Obama administration, they're spied on by the administration or thrown in jail for refusing to reveal their sources for a controversial story. But to gratuitously side with CNN when they certainly didn't have to in protecting the right of the nakedly biased, unprofessional, Trump-deranged editorialist disguised as a reporter is beyond disappointing. But perhaps not as surprising as it might seem. Fact is, Fox has slipped into establishment mode from the time Donald Trump announced he was running for president. Just like all the others, Fox News rolled out one talking head after another to denounce Trump when he was first running for president, until, of course, he got the nomination and they changed their tune somewhat, knowing their viewers wouldn't take kindly to them continuing to turn their noses up at the Republican presidential nominee, just like the rest of the establishment media. They sent Megyn Kelly out as a moderator at one of those presidential debates, and she made a spectacle of herself by calling out Trump's supposed hatred or abuse of women. Now, see, this is not really about ideology, even though Fox continues to employ the likes of Shepard Smith, the gay liberal who hosts their 3 o'clock news hour during the week, and is just as anti-Trump as most of the Trump haters at CNN and MSNBC. Most of the Fox reporters play it straight, and their evening show hosts like Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham are reliably conservative. No, it's not really Shepard Smith. It's not about the evening shows. It's not the anchors and hosts and reporters that make Fox News a creature of the swamp. It's really the management. This is more of an indictment of Fox News management than it is of the actual news operation. But how can Fox management believe that taking the side of a fake journalist and peddler of fake news like Jim Acosta deserves their support? There is no matter of principle at stake here. There's no matter of principle. Do you think any journalist from any news outlet must be guaranteed the right to enter the White House and attend press briefings? What is a journalist anyway? I mean, it's an uncredentialed profession. Anyone who proclaims him or herself a journalist doesn't have to go through a vetting or credentialing process and prove they're an actual journalist, like doctors and lawyers and accountants and architects, so many professions, even real estate agents. I mean, I have a degree in broadcast journalism from Syracuse University, but that means absolutely nothing when you get to the real world of journalism. A pretty small percentage of journalists actually have journalism degrees, even at the undergraduate level. And I can attest to the fact that having a journalism degree is totally irrelevant in the real world. So this business of Acosta is entitled to attend White House briefings, no matter how he conducts himself, is absurd on the face of it. Nobody has the right to enter the White House and face the president. Nobody has the right to enter the White House and face the president. Do you think I could march up to the White House and demand to be let in because I'm a journalist at LibertyNation.com? But Jim Acosta has that constitutional right just because he's declared a journalist for a so-called major news outlet? Here's the reality, folks. Fox News is just another member of the elite media, and their support of CNN, the amicus brief they filed on behalf of CNN, is proof. It sticks a stake through the heart of their credibility as a news outlet set apart from all the others. You see Fox cover the same news from the same angles as the three networks and CNN, the same top stories, the same agenda, as if they're playing off the same script as the elite media they're supposedly not a part of. But the most disappointing part of all this is that Fox actually believes that by getting behind CNN in their ridiculous lawsuit against the president, they'll wind up saying about the left-wing media what Sally Field famously said when she finally won an Oscar: "You like me. You like me." But just like those soft Republicans like Jeff Flake and all those never-Trump so-called conservatives like Bill Kristol and George Will and Joe Scarborough in the media, they will soon discover something they should have known long ago. The left will use you for your own purposes, but will never embrace or even accept you once your usefulness runs out. And nothing you do, can do, will change that. If selling your soul for the sake of being included on the list of acceptable Washington insiders worthy of invitations to those vaunted dinner parties and other social events in the swamp, as long as you remain useful idiots, is really worth it to you, then go ahead, join the band. It's just that we once thought you were better than that. We'll take a quick break and then come back and discuss the CNN lawsuit against the Trump administration and the judge's ruling. Plus, what the heck is the emoluments clause and why is the left using it to attack Donald Trump?
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now it's time for Talkin' Liberty as we welcome in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
And proud American, Tim. Hello.
And proud American. Good for you. I had my doubts about it, but you've now dispelled those.
Thank you.
So, Scott, CNN wins the first legal battle in their war against President Trump on behalf of the spectacle or rodeo clown known as Jim Acosta.
Maybe I'm not so proud today, Tim, with this.
I know. Well, I know this is only a temporary restraining order, but Acosta gets his press pass back, at least for the time being. Talk about the judge's ruling for a moment, his initial ruling.
Well, let me just take off on what you said there. He gets his press pass back for the time being. Unless and until the administration successfully appeals this ruling or the case in chief is heard in court and a different result happens. So right now the court has said that Acosta and CNN have met their burden for the temporary restraining order, which is that they're likely to succeed at trial, and that this deprivation of the pass is an ongoing substantial burden for them. Basically, he can't, he's denied a fundamental right his right to report is being
causing irreparable damage to Jim Acosta, even more than he could cause to himself.
Well, he's entitled.
Is that
even
possible?
Yeah, I don't know that the Judge Kennedy addressed that point.
All right, so Scott, let me ask the question which most civilians will ask. Does this mean that anyone who declares himself a journalist has a constitutional right to enter the White House and attend press conferences and briefings, no matter how they conduct themselves? What's to stop you or me from demanding to enter the White House as a journalist from LibertyNation.com?
Well, we are entitled to due process on our request. So that's part of what this decision involves. It involves reliance on a precedent whereby, I think it was 30 years, maybe it was 40 years ago, Tim, a man was denied access to being a White House White House reporter because of the credentialing process. The Secret Service basically said he was maybe a risk because of a conviction or an arrest he had years prior. Mm-hmm. And he said, you don't have to let me in, but you have to tell me, you have to establish a fair process where I can at least say, because maybe it was a case of mistaken identity, meaning, what's the fix there, right? If you go to apply and they say, well, Tim, you were convicted in Colorado of mugging somebody 5 years ago, and you can say, I've never been to Colorado. Mm-hmm. So there has to be a process. And that's what was established before for applicants, Tim. Now, that's for applicants of the White House press pass.
And so the application process is considered due process. Is that correct?
Well, what the court ruled in that case was that applicants were entitled to due process because the act of reporting itself is a First Amendment right. So then we have, as we're told, the Judge Kennedy in this case of the D.C. District Court, Federal District Court in D.C., said he's applying that principle to Mr. Acosta, and the White House did not conduct any kind of due process with this revocation, which is to say he wasn't informed that he was in danger of losing
So if they just told him your White House press pass is now revoked, sincerely, Donald J. Trump, that would have been sufficient due process?
I think it would have had to be a little bit more perfunctory than that, but not far. In other words, if it said your White House press pass is revoked because of your behavior during the press conference on November 7th, if you'd like to have it reinstated within 60 days, apply here, some kind of process. By the way, the result is not, what's required under that. It's just the process. That's what the court has said.
What I hate about this the most, I have to admit, Scott, is that it turns Jim Acosta into a martyr for the cause of freedom of the press. I don't even know what to say beyond that. Yeah. This guy's going to be held up as a paragon of press freedom. Really?
It's gross. And, why
is it gross? I have my own opinions, but what's your opinion?
Here's why it's gross. It's gross because the White House press pool has granted extraordinary access to the president, to the White House, to him and his family as they go about their lives and their travels in business. And they're granted that so that they can perform a sacred duty to Americans, which is to report on all these matters. And it's not to be like you and I are, Tim, sometimes paid for our opinion on these matters. It's just a straight report. And if you can influence your reporting, if you want to ask questions that are challenging in one area, obviously your opinions are going to matter there. But it's not to engage in some argument. The press doesn't have a right to argue with the president.
Exactly.
And Jim Acosta seems to be, benefiting mightily from all his engagements with the press. He's no dummy, Tim.
He's an editorialist disguised as a reporter.
Show on CNN and the fame and millions that come with his own show. Yeah. And I think that's why it's disgusting, because he's not acting, I believe, in the interests of press freedom, but in his own personal pecuniary and fame interests. There are a limited number of availability, just in terms of the seats in the room,
exactly.
The terminals, they have to be meted out in some fashion. What's important only in this case, Tim, and I probably should have referenced it earlier, is the only thing that's important is that people's viewpoints aren't discriminated against on the basis of granting those.
All right, well, let's move on. I don't want to take the whole segment up with the rodeo clown. Among the many things that Democrats are promising to investigate, with President Trump is possible violations of what's called the Emoluments Clause, Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. What the heck is the Emoluments Clause, and why are they trying to attack Donald Trump with it?
Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8 of the Constitution reads, "No person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept of any present emolument, office, or title of any kind, whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state." Now, emoluments just means like profit, basically, is what.
Right.
So it's just accepting stuff from a foreign state or king, okay? And it's just designed so that, as you might imagine, you can't get bribed from, a foreign government, right? It's a prohibition against that. And just in terms of throwing anything against the wall that will hurt Trump, his ongoing financial interest in his hotel empire, they claim violates the Emoluments Clause if and when foreigners stay at, for instance, the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C., that he is then profiting from their custom at that hotel in violation of the Emoluments Clause.
Is it fair to say that the left and the people using the Emoluments Clause now would settle for nothing less than Donald Trump divesting himself of his entire real estate empire?
Lawrence Tribe, who seems to be leading that tribe, if I can say that, has, I believe, stated exactly that, Tim, that he has to have complete divestiture, which I think is a bit rich considering our history. And, for instance, we know that our founders, our first president was perhaps the richest man in the colonies and almost certainly traded with people who traded with foreigners. And, it's this direct enrichment bribe thing that seems to be the goal of the clause. And whether or not it includes, some functionary or official from a foreign land who may stay at the Trump hotel, it seems like a bit of a reach to me. But you're correct, Tim. That is exactly what I'm seeing in the press and social media about what the movers of this want: complete divestiture.
Meanwhile, one more item: a hint of bipartisanship this week. Earlier this week, when President Trump went on board as supporting criminal justice reform, specifically prison reform, which is something the Democrats want. A lot of Republicans do, too. What are the kind of things that we need to see in an eventual bill?
Well, this is a baby step bill, Tim. This is not what libertarians would hope for at all. It's a minor improvement in some credits that inmates can get towards time off their sentences for things like job training and education, which, you'd think that you would want people to better themselves in prison so that they don't reoffend and are more able, but we're not incentivizing that behavior enough in prison. So this helps to incentivize that behavior so that when they come out, they're less likely to offend. It also eliminates life sentences for some drug crimes. It also eliminates gun enhancement sentences for people for whom a gun was never part of their crime. And how this comes in, Tim, is you arrest somebody for possession of drugs in their house, and it turns out there's a shotgun somewhere in the attic that they find in a search. Well, that's now a part of this drug crime, which it never was. Part of the draft of this bill, and I think it's important to add, Tim, there is no firm bill in place yet. It's sort of a moving target, I think, as they're probably negotiating with the various parties to see what can go through. And then the other main thing, I think, that really a huge thing is with the crack cocaine versus powder cocaine sentence disparity. Some of those changes go back to people who have been previously convicted and sentenced who can now get out because that original sentencing was inappropriate.
Well, crack was considered a black drug, and cocaine was considered a white drug, and certainly the criminal penalties for the two were very different.
It's very interesting how these political concerns drive our criminal justice system. In the very draft, the last draft that I read, Tim, of I think it's called the Second Chance Act or something like that, it had a number of exclusions to these reforms. And one of the exclusions is for people who've been convicted of fentanyl trafficking. And so there's this judgment that fentanyl is so bad. And you just think, is it really that much better than methamphetamine? In other words, a person who's caught up in that, do they not deserve the same rehabilitative chance that a person who was dealing methamphetamine had. It just seems to me to be, unfortunately, so directly tied to a politician's need to be able to appear tough on crime for their reelection rather than what's just.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, hosted by Scott and me and Lisa K. Donner, is available to you on demand at LibertyNation.com and, of course, from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week. We'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.